Hello everyone and welcome to a new seasonal reading themed video. Today I wanted to share some of my favourite sinister summer reads with you. I've noticed that a lot of the books I really love to read in the summertime not only feature soaring temperatures, but there's often an air of underlying suspense or even menace to the plots. And this is what really keeps me turning the pages and wanting to find out what happens next in these books. I think books that have that edge of suspense to them are wonderful summertime reads because if you're off on holiday or you're traveling around, it really is great to have a book that you're totally gripped by and you just want to keep reading. It makes any plane or car or train journey go a lot faster. So let me share some of my favorites with you. The first one is Bitter Orange by Claire Fuller. This is such a great summer read. It has those heatwave temperatures that matches the rising tensions between the characters, and there's just a lot I enjoy about this book. It's set in 1969 and its protagonist is a middle-aged woman called Frances who is running from some kind of secret in her past. She accepts a rather unconventional job, which is to inspect the follies that are in the grounds of this crumbling manor house in the English countryside. This house has just been bought by an owner who's overseas, so he has hired Frances to inspect the follies and to report back to him through letters. She enjoys getting to know the house and the grounds, but one day she's really surprised when a man and a woman, a young couple, turn up and say that they've also been hired by the overseas owner to report back on various aspects of this house. At first, things seem to go okay, and Frances becomes friends with this young couple. But soon a lot of tension comes to the surface and their friendship begins to disintegrate into something much more dangerous. There's a real twist at the end of this book, which I won't spoil for you, but it's such a good page-turning, hot summer read, so I really recommend it. Then another author who I always enjoy, but I think she's great to pick up in the summertime, is Kate Morton. And I have two Kate Morton books that I especially recommend as summer reads, and they're actually her two most recent novels, so The Clockmaker's Daughter and Homecoming. We'll start with The Clockmaker's Daughter, which is set in the UK. It has her typical dual timeline, so there's like a modern day timeline and then there's a historic timeline. I especially love the historic timeline in this book. And it really is the sort of central story of the book as well. It's set over a hot summer in, I think, 1862. Yes, the summer of 1862. And it follows a group of artists who go and stay in a house in the countryside. You can tell I love books that are set in houses in the English countryside, and this is another one. So they're all staying in this house in the English countryside that was actually based on a real house called Kelmscott, which is where William Morris lived, and I've been there and it's amazing. So it's based on this house which is right by the River Thames, and it follows this group of artists who are hoping to have a creative and idyllic summer together. But before the month is over, a woman has been shot dead and another woman is missing. Oh, it's such a sort of chilling, suspenseful read. I just love it. So definitely a good one to add to your summertime reading pile. And then of course Homecoming is a wonderful heatwave reading novel. Although this book is set during our winter months and there's a Christmas scene in this, it is set in Australia. So in fact it's the height of summer in this book, and it describes those heatwave temperatures, the baking heat of Australia, and it's just such an atmospheric book. Again, it follows a dual timeline, and at the heart of this book is this mystery about a very strange death of a young mother and her children that occurred when they were picnicking by a riverside. And much of the book is unraveling this mystery. What happened in the past? Who was really responsible? It goes into so many interesting issues as well on motherhood and journalism, the importance of truth-telling. It's just such a great read. And again, it just follows families and the secrets that they tell, which is a core theme of so many of Kate Morton's books. And it just adds that layer of suspense to the novel, and it makes you keep guessing. So another great one for summertime reading. Now, this book I wasn't entirely sure about recommending. I read it last summer and I didn't love it, but what did stay with me was its summer setting. That really is very well done. This is set in New York City, and it describes that hot, humid, sticky heat of the city so well. I've had quite a few summers in New York and I know what it's like, and this just brings it to life so well. It's set in the modern day, and it's about a young museum worker who gets a job at the Cloisters Museum in New York City. And it really makes me want to go to that museum. I'm disappointed I've never been, because it really made me want to go. She's thrilled to get this job, but she realizes that there are very strange tensions between the other members of staff in this small, close-knit museum. And things reach boiling point when one of these members of staff dies. So again, there's a mysterious death at the heart of this book. I didn't love the characters and I didn't love the plot, so I can't wholeheartedly recommend it. But I liked the setting a lot. I liked the museum setting, and as a book that really evokes that baking summer heat of New York City, it did that very well. So I know some people did enjoy this, and if it interests you, then it might be worth giving a go. Now, a huge favourite of mine to read in the summertime is The Green Gage Summer by Ruma Goden. This is a coming of age and a loss of innocence novel that's set in France, and it's actually based on a real life event that happened to Ruma Goden and her sister. It's actually about sisters who are on holiday in France when their mother is taken ill and has to go to hospital. So they're left to fend for themselves in this French hotel. And they get to know some of the guests staying at the hotel as well as the hotel proprietress. The protagonist of this story is the younger sister, who is really on the brink of womanhood, and she's observing her older sister starting to interact with adults and gain her footage in the adult world, which the younger sister doesn't fully understand yet. There's a man that they meet in the hotel who instinctively the sisters like, but they also know there's just something a bit off about him. And there's a brilliant twist at the end of this book, which I won't spoil for you, but it's a slight page-turning read. It evokes hot France in the summertime, and it's just a brilliant read, so one I very much recommend. Another book that again features heatwave temperatures, and it's a coming-of-age story as well as a loss of innocence story, is The Go-Between by LP Harley. This is very much a book told in retrospect. It's an older man looking back at his much younger self at this one hot summer where a certain event took place that changed the whole course of his life. It has the famous opening line, "The past is another country. They do things differently there." Or maybe it's the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. One or the other. But it's a brilliantly written, beautiful book. Again, it's very much about a child getting involved in the adult world. And although he witnesses what happens in that world, he doesn't actually understand what he's seeing a lot of the time. And then there's this dramatic moment at the end of the book that really speaks to the sort of Edwardian society in which this is set, that alters the course of this young man's life. So again, if you want a book with that slight air of suspense running through it. You know there's a kind of doomed ending, but you're not sure why. And again, it features this heat wave summer in which the temperature, the season really is this key factor in the book. I think you would really like this. Another brilliant heatwave read for me is Passing by Nellalson. This was first published in 1929, and although not all of the book is set over the summertime, there's such a memorable scene at the beginning of the book that features a heat wave in Chicago, and that's always stuck with me. Again, this is a novel that has that air of underlying menace. So you're expecting something to go wrong. You're not quite sure what's going to happen. And these tensions between the two female characters at the heart of this story keep rising and rising. And they sort of match that heat wave feeling that's at the start of the book. And I wanted to actually just read the beginning of chapter 2 to you, because I think you'll see what I mean. This is what Irene Redfield remembered. Chicago, August. A brilliant day, hot, with a brutal, staring sun pouring down rays that were like molten rain. A day on which the very outlines of the buildings shuddered as if in protest at the heat. Quivering lines sprang up from baked pavements and wriggled along the shining car tracks. The automobiles parked at the curbs were a dancing blaze, and the glass of the shop windows threw out a blinding radiance. Sharp particles of dust rose from the burning sidewalks, stinging the seared or dripping skins of wilting pedestrians. What small breeze there was seemed like the breath of a flame fanned by slow bellows. I just think that's amazing. I love it when a season becomes almost like another character in a story. And in this heat wave moment, this hot, hot day in Chicago, is the setting for this pivotal scene in which Irene, the main protagonist in this book, meets another woman from her childhood who she hasn't seen for years. And this sudden meeting sets off this string of events that ultimately results in tragedy. This is such an amazing classic to read. It explores themes of race and women's relationships so well, and is just such a thought-provoking and very good read for the summertime too. So definitely one that I recommend. Next up is Uncle Paul by Celia Fremlin. I love the quote that describes Celia Fremlin as the grandmother of psycho-domestic noir. And that's such a good summing up. I love this idea of domestic noir, and her books often do have what you'd think of as more of a typical kind of cozy or domestic setting, but she completely sort of upends your expectations, and her books are actually filled with a very subtle suspense that builds as you keep reading. And I just love that, and I love the idea of the domestic noir. So Uncle Paul by her was first published in 1959, and it's about three sisters. One of the sisters, Meg, gets this urgent summons from her sister, I think it's Isabel, yes, and saying that their third sister, who's actually their half-sister, Mildred, and is quite a bit older than them, has started to behave very strangely. So Meg joins Isabel in the seaside resort in England, where Isabel's having a not particularly happy summer holiday with her children and husband. And the weather in this book is a very typically English summertime sort of weather, in that it's rainy and cold half of the time, as well as occasionally being sunny. Mildred is there as well, and what Meg realizes is that Mildred's strange behavior is really stemming from a conviction that she has that her first husband, who was convicted for killing his first wife just after his marriage to Mildred, his second wife, she's convinced that he is now out of prison and is determined to hunt her down and seek revenge. Meg thinks this is ridiculous, but as she tries to find out whether Uncle Paul, as she used to call Mildred's husband, is still in prison or not, she begins to grow suspicious of those around her, and she wonders if Uncle Paul is actually there amongst them. So I love this book. There are actually some real moments of humour, and I think it's so hard to mix in humour with suspense, but somehow Celia Fremlin does that very well. And I just really recommend this, again, as a great summertime read. Now, another favourite of mine, which I've also raved about on my channel before, is The Wheel Spins by Ethel Lena White. Again, this is a brilliant page turner. It actually starts in September, but it's during a heat wave. The young heroine is wanting to get home. She's been on holiday in a sort of unspecified country in Europe, I think, and she's just dying to get home. She's very wealthy and she's been quite spoilt all her life, but she's found herself sort of unexpectedly on her own, and she wants to return to England. But just before she gets on the train, she suffers from sunstroke. It's a baking hot day. And she falls unconscious. She realizes that she's been unwell, but she's just able to get on the train once she's woken up. So she manages to get on the train. However, she's still feeling quite ill. There's another English woman in the compartment who helps her, and she's very thankful for her help, but she soon falls asleep again. When she wakes up a few hours later, she realizes this English woman is no longer in the compartment. She expects she'll return at some point, but in fact she never does. So she starts wondering what on earth has happened to her. And when she starts to question other people in the compartment and on the train, they deny that there was ever a second English woman in the compartment. Is our young heroine telling the truth? Is she suffering from sunstroke? Was she hallucinating? Or is there some kind of conspiracy happening, which she doesn't know why they would be lying? You can tell why this book inspired Alfred Hitchcock. He made a film out of this book called The Lady Vanishes. Although it's quite different in many ways from the original storyline and plot, you can tell it was that underlying suspense that really got him, and it gets me too. It's just such a page-turning read. I loved it, so definitely one that I recommend. Perfect book to have on you if you're on a train and you want a good page-turner. I really enjoyed it. Another book I've raved about a lot in the past is The Feast by Margaret Kennedy. This starts out after a very dramatic event has just taken place. The cliff face has just fallen onto a hotel in Cornwall, crushing the hotel and killing many of the guests who are staying there. As the reader, you know at the start of the book that some of those guests have survived, many haven't. You don't know who the survivors are. The novel then kind of goes back in time a few weeks into August, and you start to get to know the people who were staying at the hotel. And the more you read, the more you become anxious that certain characters made it out okay. So this really keeps you, again, turning those pages because you just want to find out who has survived and who hasn't. You know that there's this looming disaster that's awaiting all of those characters, and you become quite invested in finding out what happens at the end. This is a strange book in some ways. It's almost a sort of fable of sorts, because it takes the 7 deadly sins, like greed and gluttony and pride and envy and lust, and some of the hotel guests are made to personify these sins. So there are a lot of unlikable characters in this book. There are a lot you are not rooting for, to be honest, and you don't mind so much if they don't make it out okay. But there are some characters that, on the other hand, who are lovely and you actually really get to like and you really want to be okay. So it's a strange book in some ways, but I think Margaret Kennedy is an amazing writer. It's just so well written and it keeps you guessing And again, it's a great summer read set in Cornwall in August, but a really unusual twist on the typical holiday novel. So one I highly recommend. Now, if you love suspense books, then Mary Stewart is definitely one you have to try. And this is one that I'm recommending as a good summertime read as well. It's called Heirs Above the Ground. And it's set mainly in Vienna, which I love. I really like the premise of this book, which is about a young wife who believes her husband is on a business trip to Stockholm, I think. But then one day she turns on the news and she sees news about a fire in Vienna. And in the newsreel sort of footage, she captures a glimpse of her husband, who shouldn't be there at all. He should be in Stockholm. So she heads to Vienna herself to find out what is going on and becomes embroiled in a whole sort of mystery and adventure. Again, it's a great page turner. I love Mary Stewart. She wrote a lot of kind of light thrillers tinged with romance and set in interesting locations abroad. So I'm a big fan of her books and I've read a lot of them, but Heirs Above the Ground has always been a favourite of mine. Another favourite of author, and also having just spoken about Cornwall with The Feast, I also wanted to recommend Daphne du Maurier's Frenchman's Creek. Now, Daphne du Maurier is definitely the master of suspense. When you think of novels like Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel, I absolutely love them. However, one of her books that I really like to return to in the summertime is one set in Cornwall that's Frenchman's Creek. And this is one of her historical novels. And it's just such a good book. It's full of tension, full of suspense and action and adventure. It's about a very lively heroine who is unhappily married and who really rebels against the constrictive society of her day, and she longs for adventure. And she goes down to her house in Cornwall, sort of escaping her husband in London, and there she stumbles upon a pirate and his ship, and she falls in love with him. But all of Cornwall is sort of on the search for this French pirate, and they want him dead. So she has to try to protect him. There's lots of tension. It's just a great summertime read too. So if you want a bit more of romance mixed in with some sort of thriller adventure, then I would go for Frenchman's Creek. It's a real classic. Now, another book that is a wonderful, tense read is Vera by Elizabeth von Arnim. Very different from a lot of von Arman's most famous books like The Enchanted April or Elizabeth and Her German Garden, which are some of my favourite comfort reads. Vera is very, very different. And actually, if you love Daphne du Maurier, then I think you might see echoes of Rebecca in Vera. It's about a young second wife who, once she marries her husband and moves to his home in the country, becomes aware that his first wife died in rather suspicious circumstances, and she becomes increasingly worried and disillusioned over the relationship with her husband, who's a very menacing character in this book. It feels a bit like an autumnal read, I have to say. It's actually set generally more in the sort of spring and summer, but it's the type of book that if it's a summer day when it's actually raining, which we get a lot in the UK, then this is the sort of book that you just want to curl up with. If you're staying indoors, you could read this one weekend afternoon on a rainy day and just lose yourself in the pages, and it will definitely keep your interest. It's a very gripping read. Like I said, it's sort of set more in the spring, summer months, but there's a lot of wind and rain in this book too, and it's just very atmospheric, so I really recommend it. And then finally, for a real sort of thriller that has a real sort of quirky edge to it too though, and it's a page turner, but it's got some dark humour to it as well, and that's My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite, and this is set in Nigeria, and it's about a very likeable sister who you sort of really like sympathize with. She's a lovely character, but she's realized that her sister is in fact a serial killer. And I don't want to say too much more, I don't want to spoil the plot at all, but ultimately the sister has to decide what to do about her psychopath sister. And it's just a really memorable, really good book that, again, if you've got sort of a journey ahead of you, this would really keep you engrossed, and it's a good summer read. So those are all of my recommendations for great suspenseful summertime books. I hope you enjoy them. I hope you've got some great summer reading ahead. Do let me know if you're a fan of any of these, or if any of these books are ones you want to add to your reading list. But thank you so much for watching this video. Extra big thanks to those of you who pressed the super thanks button on my last video. As always, I so appreciate your support, and I'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.